Hey guys, it's Libby, and today I am reviewing Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. This is the final book that Charles Dickens completed in his lifetime. He died while working on Edwin Drood, which is one of the few other Dickens that I've actually read. I started this book during Victober, but there is quite a lot of it. It's about 800 pages, so I didn't finish it until December. And when I reviewed another of my Victober reads, Desperate Remedies, I complained very much about the cover that seemed to be most prominent. I don't have a physical copy because I read most of my classics digitally, but I have to say, this cover from, I think it's the Everyman's Library, this is an excellent cover for this book. You have the money, and some of it's grimy, and a couple of that is new and shiny, and this book is all about money and its grubbiness, and also who's got new money, who's got old money, what all that means. It would be very difficult to give you a concise preview of the plot of this book. There's about 30 important characters that you need to keep track of, and they all are sort of in their own separate worlds, and then those worlds start like intermingling, and it's hard to keep track of who knows who from what, and like sometimes people use fake names. I actually found it immensely helpful to watch Katie from Books and Things, her videos about Our Mutual Friend. She has just finished a Victorian-style read-along where the Goodreads group read the chapters as they were published. So this book was published serially, only a couple of chapters being published every month, and that's the rate that they read them at. And then Katie made a video for each of those chapters. So it was really helpful to read 3, 4, sometimes 5 chapters, and then go like get a recap and sort of get told everything that was important in those chapters. So if you are planning to read Our Mutual Friend, I would definitely go subscribe to Katie if you are not already. I really don't understand how you can be subscribed to me and not subscribe to Katie. Our Mutual Friend is her favorite book ever, and her videos about it are very helpful and interesting. Now, I think I do have to tell you something about the plot in order to be able to talk about the book at all for this review. So to just leave out so very many things, I will say that this book is about an inheritance. A man who has made money basically by like going through all of the trash that London has produced. So he has these giant piles of trash in the back of his house. He has died before the book begins and has left all of the money he's made from the trash business to his son. But in the first chapter, a body is dredged from the Thames River, and it turns out to be this son. So then we follow the father and daughter that pulled the body out of the river. We follow the servants of this rich man who end up inheriting the money since the son is dead. And we follow the woman who was supposed to marry this son, and it was required that he marry her in order to get the inheritance. We also follow basically anyone that they ever meet or that they have anything to do with. Now, Charles Dickens is one of the most famous writers in the English language, but I feel like the amount of fame he enjoys does not equal the amount of love that he enjoys. Like, Shakespeare is famous, and a lot of people really love Shakespeare, and Dickens is famous, and some people really love Dickens, but some people are like, no. And so there were 2 concerns that I had when I started reading this book. The first one is the common criticism of Dickens, the fact that he was paid by the word, and it shows, and he goes on at length about things that people don't care about. And then my personal problem that I have with Dickens from the other books that I've read by him are that he will occasionally just be incredibly mean to his characters, and it feels like they only exist for him to complain about traits that he finds annoying in his acquaintances. And I have to say, if either of those are problems that you have with Dickens, they were remarkably absent in Our Mutual Friend. This is a very long book, but there's always stuff happening, and I won't say none of it feels pointless, but I will say very little of it feels pointless. There was one section, it's only about 2 pages long, But it's where I feel like Dickens made both of those faults that I was concerned about, both the going on about things people don't care about with too many words, and the being needlessly mean. It's towards the end of the book, and it comes at a very inconvenient time. A life is literally hanging in the balance, and Dickens takes this opportunity to introduce us to several new characters. One of them, a clergyman, is, like, actually relevant to the plot, and then we also meet his wife, who, like, I guess she's allowed to be relevant to the plot too. But then Dickens spends about 2 pages talking about this parishioner of the clergyman's, and how she, like, bothers the clergyman by, like, asking for his advice about everything. That poor woman, she has nothing to do with the plot, but she's just being dragged in so that Dickens can complain about someone who bothered him, I'm sure. And as I was reading that, I was just like, why is this happening? Get me back to the actual story, please? But it's only 2 pages in 800, so I'll forgive him for that. Since there are many other things that Dickens does so well. One of them is his gift for incredibly accurate and pithy descriptions. In fact, sometimes it felt like I was reading a Terry Pratchett novel. When one of the numerous baddies in the story is getting his comeuppance, involving salt and pepper of all things, I was having some conflicted feelings because these are really bad things happening to this person, but I thought it was hilarious. And then Dickens describes this person as something along the lines of flopping about like a dolphin or porpoise in its native element. And that was the funniest thing ever, and I felt like Dickens was reaching across the decades and giving me permission to find this terrible thing hilarious. Another thing that Dickens is very good at, and possibly uniquely good at least from the writers that I've read, is introducing characters and letting his audience get to know them in the same way that you would get to know a person in real life. So when you're reading a typical book, unless the author has some specific plot-based reason to deceive you about the significance or the intentions of a certain character, you can usually tell who's going to be our protagonist, who's going to be the people assisting the protagonist, who's going to be the bad guy, who's going to be characters who are just in this for one scene and then we don't care about them anymore. But that's not what real life is like. When you first meet someone, you don't know if they're going to become your best friend or your worst enemy or the person you get married to or someone you will never see again and forget about 10 minutes later. And Dickens actually totally got me with this one. While I was reading chapter 2, I was convinced that Mr. Twemlow was going to be our protagonist because he is kind of the audience avatar in chapter 2. Those of you who read the book will know that Mr. Twemlow is not a particularly important character. He shows up in maybe 4 chapters and basically does 1.5 things. So throughout the next several chapters, I was committed to this idea for a while. I was like carefully looking for things that would be relevant to Mr. Twemlow. And of course, there weren't any because he's not that important of a character. Although actually, looking at the book as a whole, I think maybe Mr. Twemlow is the main character of Our Mutual Friend. What does it mean to be a protagonist? Mr. Twemlow is there with us at the beginning and at the end. And what little arc he has, I think that story may have been the real impetus behind Dickens writing this novel. And everyone else's arcs are just there to serve the Mr. Twemlow arc. Am I convincing anyone? So at this point, I've said many nice things about this book. I think I'm now allowed to say some not nice things. I put 5 stars on Goodreads. It is in fact a 4.5 stars for me, but only because I am able to ignore a pretty significant part of the plot. Book 4, chapter 13, basically ruined everything for me. Those of you who watched my, I think it was August wrap-up where I read all the Shakespeare history plays, will know that I have a significant problem with Henry IV Part 1, which is quite a good play, and I like many things about it, but I hate Prince Hal's opening speech where he says that he doesn't even want to do this and he's just like faking it and stuff. Knowing that he thinks that colors the rest of the play and kind of makes it meaningless. Similarly, in Our Mutual Friend, in book 4, chapter 13, you learn some of the intentions of some of the characters, and it basically ruins that whole part of the plot. And with Prince Hal, at least I can just ignore that speech, and the play goes on perfectly fine without it. I'm working on constructing some elaborate headcanon to accomplish the things that happen in that chapter, but are not quite as frustrating as the things that actually happen in that chapter. Does anyone like that chapter? Katie didn't like that chapter. I abhor it. So yeah, that does make the book kind of difficult to rate, because basically one of the major plot lines, there's sort of 2 major plot lines, and then, depending on how you want to count it, 2 to 4 minor plot lines. One of the major plot lines is just utterly ruined, which normally would make a book like a 2.5. But then only one very small part of that plot line is the part doing the ruining, which would make it like a 4. So what I do is I just pretend that that chapter doesn't exist, and then we leave it at a nice lofty 4.5. Okay, I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this video. I'll see you later. There is literally a life hanging in the balance, and Hardy takes... Did I say Hardy instead of Dickens? You guys know what I meant.